So here is where I want to start, okay? And really, we have kind of two questions today that we're gonna tackle if we even have time to tackle both of these questions. So we'll just kind of let it go where it goes. And that's this. I wanna start with the phrase "Black Lives Matter." I think everyone agrees that this is a
lot of emotion there.
Loaded phrase. Angus, you and I yesterday, we marched together in D.C. Yep. It was a great march.
Yep.
Joined with a bunch of other followers of Christ. We marched from Anacostia all the way into Capitol Hill all the way to the White House.
Yep.
I think I walked 19,000 steps yesterday, according to my iPhone.
I didn't even check.
But my legs hurt.
Yeah.
Was an incredible time. A lot of prayer, a lot of singing. And then we were together on Black Lives Matter Plaza,
Yep.
Which used to be 16th Street, or still is. I'm not sure.
It's not.
I think that
It is now Black Lives Matter
It's
Plaza
not
in downtown D.C. We were there together. So obviously, if you can see Black Lives Matter painted on that street from space.
Yep.
So it's a big phrase, and it's obviously really got started to get its traction with after the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson.
Yep.
Is when that began.
Some
to
of the
get,
traction
that's kind of when it began, and then obviously that's been growing. But the reason I think that I use the phrase "it's loaded," which we're even gonna. I would even love to even just hear your response to me saying that phrase is loaded. Well, I'd just love to hear that. But the other reason is obviously there is. I don't know if it's just one or if there's several political organizations that use that phrase as well, are called by that phrase, that support a number of different political agendas that I know for me, for example, just straight up, I've read some of those political agendas that I would not support many of those items that says. So I think what happens is there's a lot of people who are very uncomfortable with that phrase because of maybe what seems to be, in my view, distant association with these organizations and their political agendas. Anyway, love to dig into that. Let's get some clarity. So first question is this, and I mean, it's for all of us. What's your response when I even say the phrase Black Lives Matter is a controversial and loaded phrase? What thoughts even come to your mind?
You want to start?
Sure. What comes to my mind is I feel the same way, and I think that many blacks do. Black Lives Matter as a movement, like the BLM movement, I think it started from a great place. When I look back at when it very first started, there was never really clear leadership. Like even now, I think a lot of blacks would agree, you're not sure who truly runs the organization. Like we can go to the page. So there's two things. There's Black Lives Matter, the phrase, and how it's perceived and understood. Mm-hmm. Then there's Black Lives Matter, the actual, like the organization, right? Mm-hmm. The website, the BLM, the group behind it, or the series of groups behind it, right? Mm-hmm. Because there truly doesn't seem to be one thing. It seems to be like even almost localized, different BLM chapters and groups, and they don't all talk to each other necessarily. So the phrase itself, I would say a lot of folks perceive it as only Black Lives Matter, that was the intent behind it. And that's why I think a lot of people like who aren't black or outside of like maybe, even just minority groups, and they think that that's what the phrase is meant to invoke. And I don't think that was the initial desire, right? I think the initial desire was to say Black Lives Matter, and that's just it, right? Because we're showing as a society that to a certain level of or a certain degree, a certain subsection of America, they don't believe that. They don't really believe that Black Lives Matter at the same level as mine. Right. So it really was more of a message of equality, that Black Lives Matter as much as yours.
Right.
And we
need to emphasize that right now.
Right. And we need to emphasize that right now. At this point where we are, we need to emphasize that. Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah. So I think what I'll add to that is, it is controversial. And I think that's where the conversation should start. Like, listen to the words. Words matter. Mm-hmm. Black lives matter. Mm-hmm. Like, think about how interesting it is that the word matter has to be used. Like, if you look at the 1960 Memphis sanitation worker strike, go read the signs that they said. It said, "I am a man."
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Like, think about how for so long we've had to struggle and wrestle with the identification of humanity.
Basic identity.
The basic identity of humanity. So when we say Black Lives Matter, it's like, instead of like focusing on the the controversy that comes from hearing that, think about why that's where we have to start. Like, what is the next level down?
Right.
Is it Black lives exist? Can we agree upon that? And when you think about how wild that is, it really highlights the place we're at, like the problem and why the pain and the exhaustion and what you're seeing on the streets. To add to what you said about how Black Lives Matter is run as an organization, it's a grassroots movement. Think about why that is. That's intentional by nature. Like, Black Lives Matter is a bunch of local chapters because all of these things are systemic issues. They live in our communities. They live where we live. They're local problems that have to be solved, and each of them are different in slightly different ways. But look at the history of leaders that rose up, you know, from the civil rights movement, even before all that. You think about Malcolm X. You think about Martin Luther King. Anybody that rises up to like lead a movement to make impact in the Black community, they get killed, they get assassinated. So Black Lives Matter, like, who started it and how it officially.
Well, it almost has to be grassroots because of where
be.
they're coming from.
Like, this is an intentional done thing to protect the safety and sanctity of the organization, so that, like, you know, because it has to be at a grassroots level. So some of these things are done intentionally. So if you step back and think about like why that is, again, all these questions that we're asking are really good questions. But what I would challenge us to do is to step back and think, like, why do we have to ask that type of a question?
Yeah.
Because therein lies like the answer,
problem.
the
Yeah,
problem
sure,
and
and
the
the
answer.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah. So that Black Lives Matter, controversy. Like,
Yeah,
why?
and I think too, like, sometimes we look at that statement as it's a group of Black people saying that to everyone else. Black Lives Matter. But sometimes these statements are also Black people saying it to themselves, right? My life matters because I've been told for so long that it doesn't, right? Or I've experienced life in a way that I've been told that it doesn't.
Right.
You know, a lot of people would ask, well, you know, Justin, why did you cry when you went to go see Black Panther? Right? I mean, I cried because,
I cried too.
and why did I cry? Because my whole life I've had Superman.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've had Batman.
Right.
That doesn't mean I don't love Batman and I don't love Superman. I love those superheroes.
Yeah.
But I always thought, well, because I am Black, I will never have a superhero, and the superhero could never be Black because Blacks aren't good enough to be a superhero.
Yeah.
I honestly thought that as a kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I didn't have anyone tell me different.
Right.
No one told me.
Yeah.
Right? Outside of the value that my parents gave me.
Yeah.
But outside of that, no one told me. I didn't have society telling me.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So
That's a great example that gets exactly to your point, and thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Right. So it would have been nice for a message to come out like Black men can be and Black women can be superheroes. Black people are superheroes. You are a superhero. Now, would you take offense to that? Because I needed to be told that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so when I think Black Lives Matter, I think about it more from that perspective. Like,
Yeah, totally.
Black people, they're Blacks out there that just need to hear it. Right?
So one thing I've heard is that, okay, Black Lives Matter. This is it's a movement that is kind of, they're behind all of the unrest. They are orchestrating the riots. They're orchestrating the mass protests and all of those things. And so it's kind of almost like this conspiracy type. There's this mastermind organization behind the scenes, kind of like a chessboard. And obviously, I think that's not true. But this phrase, Black Lives Matter, has just spread like wildfire. So many people are identifying with it. And of course, with however many people are identifying with it, there's going to be all kinds of different things attached along with it. That's just, that's to be expected. So for you guys, and you've already touched on it though, like when you first heard Black Lives Matter, you know, and that becoming a hashtag, and that becoming a movement, that becoming a chant. You know what I mean? What did that do to you? Like, what happened inside of you?
I mean, for me, like, it's like, yeah, it's exciting,
Yeah.
right? But to be honest, I know what world I live in.
Mm-hmm.
So let me put back on my mask and make sure I can continue to keep people that don't look like me comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you honestly, there's maybe even a sense inside of you that, man, I don't want to get too excited about this because it might just lead back to where it might not necessarily lead to change, or.
I mean, I think it can lead to change, but like, there's got to be organization. There's got to be like a plan of what we're gonna do. But more importantly, like we've got to have people that don't look like us behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what's feeling a little different now, right? Like, you know, I live in white corporate America.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you think it's gonna get me somewhere to run around with Black Lives Matter shirts on? I'm not crazy. I know that. But I think as we talk to our peers, and I'm having some really great conversations now with my white coworkers, which I've actually had them proactively when I can, but now the listening is different. You know how you read a book? If you ever learn something to teach it, you take different notes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If you've got to
Good
teach
statement.
something that you're going to learn, like if you have to learn something that you have to go teach, you just take different notes. And that's what's happening now. And I'm literally these are some quotes from some of my peers that I work with, some of my white peers that I work with, as I just share my story, my life, as I just share resources. Like they'll digest it and they'll come back and be like, yo, wow. Like, how do you compartmentalize this? And I'll be honest with you, right? Like, as I look back to the superhero point, it wasn't until like this recent movement that I stepped back and looked at like, wow, that's kind of crazy that I'm able to navigate that in that way. But like, cause it's the only life I know, you know? So, I mean, we can dive more into that. And I forgot how I went down that rabbit trail, but
Yeah. I thought were you going to say something? I thought you were going to say something.
Not specific to that point. Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah. So let me,
good. Are you going to ask another question?
yes.
I do want to poke on something that I
Yeah,
know
do it.
is on everybody's mind, right?
Yep.
So we talked about the Black Lives Matter piece, and I asked, like, well, think about like why we have to say Black Lives Matter. Like the fact that we have to even say that they matter is controversial, or even at all. Why do we have to say that? What I loved about your sermon is like how you called out like how we can have this binary thinking. We live in a social media world and culture where everything is sound bites. We get fed information. We want things microwaved quick to us so that we don't have to research. We want cliff notes. Like, give me the short and fast headline. We'll read a headline and be like, okay, I understand the story.
Got it.
Like, I'll skim the article. We're so lazy. The article at the top
now an
has to tell you.
expert.
Yeah, so we're so lazy. The article at the top has to tell you how long it
Yes.
takes to read it.
Right.
Or the little subpoints.
Right. Or we'll get a TLDR. So think about like
Right.
how that's the world we live in, right? Like that. I just give it to me real quick.
It's not conducive to conversation.
It's not conducive to conversation. And so, as you stated so eloquently, like when we get this binary conversation going on, there's no room for nuance. So you're looking at a picture of Earth from space, and it's hard to tell, is it really raining underneath that cloud? Because you can't see on the other side of the cloud. You're just like, there's clouds. And so I said all that to say is like we get these fragmented perspectives of like, okay, well, the images that I get to see is like, okay, well, every time I think about Africa, I think about starving children. There's no money in Africa because that's what I'm fed because I don't go do my own research, right? Or the images I'm fed, if I grew up in a predominantly white area and never met a black person until I'm 14, these are stories I've heard that I've never thought about. These are educational things that I learned about white people's lives, some of them, right? That never crossed my mind, but it gave me empathy for their particular situation because I was like, wow, if you've never seen a black person until you were 14, that means all the images of people that look like me were fed to you with a certain narrative.
Right.
So think about that. And now, if that's the case, I see Black Lives Matter, then I'm thinking, man, they're about to come burn everything up and tear everything down. When really, like, the people doing a lot of the violence is definitely not part of Black Lives Matter movement.
Right.
And it's not, most of them don't look like us.
Right, and that's important to say, which is because I even saw, a couple members from our church asking the question, which was a great question to ask. Like, is Black Lives Matter behind what we're seeing now? And my response was, Black Lives Matter plays a part, but what you're seeing right now really is an outpouring beyond just even the Black Lives Matter movement, which I hope would be a desire of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? That we see this unification. Yeah. My daughters went down yesterday to the Ruston protest, and they came back with their videos and their pictures, and they were just so excited, you know, and all the kids were making signs, and they were like FaceTiming all their friends beforehand with their signs, and you know, it became like a big art project thing too, and they went down there and had an awesome time, and all their videos, I mean, it was majority white people who were down there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and I think,
Outcry.
yeah, and I think even Obama made the point in his town hall that he did last week, which was, this is a little bit different than what you saw with the civil rights movement, because you saw mostly blacks organizing and mobilizing, whereas here we're seeing something a little bit different. We're seeing, you know, all over the world, people of all different races sort of mobilizing around this issue, which is a wonderful thing to see.
Yeah.
You know,
And I think so. You know, to that point, and the idea of kind of binary thinking is, you know, what it does. I think with this specific conversation on the Black Lives Matter is, you know, let's say you've just got this huge group of people, millions of people who are rallying around that phrase, right? That phrase has become a marker, a defining phrase for them. And now there's a subset of them, right, that have said, but we also support all of these things. And then so what binary thinking is going to cause us to do is say, okay, because I don't agree with this subset of people within the larger movement, the entire movement is now infected by this or that or this or that, right? And so therefore let's discount them. Let's say, hey, that phrase Black Lives Matter, we need to reject. We need to be careful about it, because I don't want to be guilty by association with this smaller subset of people. Does that make sense? And I think that's what binary thinking does. It doesn't allow for any nuanced conversation. Right. You know, another thing I think of is like, you know, yesterday, you know, we went down to the White House yesterday. We were right out there, you know what I mean, amidst everything. And yeah, there was some evidence that some shenanigans had happened down there. But at the same time, it's like, it was not even close. Like, not even I mean, if anything, there are a ton of people out there. There are some people protesting. There are people out there selling food. There were people out there dancing. There were like, it was nothing but peaceful. But all of the images that you are fed are, you know what I mean? Man, people are just going crazy. And it's like, actually, if you were to dig down into it on a relationship level, I feel like the Black Lives Matter movement is majority a very peaceful,
most definitely,
and I would say simple movement, and that they are just trying to say, hey, Black Lives Matter. Like that's a very simple phrase.
It's super simple.
Don't add all this additional context that's unnecessary.
Right.
Don't add context around things that are unspoken, and that you think everybody is believing.
Yeah.
And just this whole idea of context, like that's just something I believe deeply in anyway. I mean, obviously, and that there aren't always simple answers, and people want to search for really. I mean, sometimes the answer is cut and dry, yes or no, right or wrong. But for most stuff that affects us, it just isn't when it comes to issues like this. There's a lot of nuance. And even within the black community, there's a lot of nuance. The reality is there are people who are out there rioting unnecessarily. There are people who are going to use this as a means to, advance their own personal agendas, right? But not for the advancement of the people as a whole, right? So you see that.
Yeah. The binary thinking thing, like we all need to, we all have a responsibility, right? Everybody on all sides of every issue. I think everyone has a responsibility to say, hey, let's not allow binary thinking to shut down conversation. Yeah. And that's what it does. That's what it does.
Yeah.
You know, it just came up for me while you were explaining the perspective of like the challenge of saying like, hey, I found this platform, Black Lives Matter, and I'm reading something that I don't agree with, so I can't say Black Lives Matter. I think there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's some psychological challenges that you need to inspect deeper than that as to why you can't even say the phrase. Because saying the phrase is different from like signing up and being a part of the movement, like as far as, or believing in the platform. Those are two different things. And if we're really honest with ourselves, we should like compartmentalize those two, because look at a lot of the executive statements out here that they struggle with even mentioning the words Black Lives Matter. Now, to be fair, some of that is because of the direct association with, like, I don't want to be affiliated with the organization. Okay, fair. So let's unpack that. And this is where I find that we have to be ready for a deeper level of discussion to really unpack what's going on here. And it's right in front of us. It is literally the pink elephant in the room. Let's talk about it, right? So let's think about this. We're constantly told as Black people, there's a couple bad apples in the police force. Like, not all cops are bad, right? We're constantly like, hey, you need to like not take that image you see in your communities and how you're treated when you're pulled over, or the way you're handled when you're pulled over. Like, you're definitely guilty until assumed innocent, right? Or assumed guilty until proven innocent. And we're told that, hey, look, you've got to take that and take the good with the bad and just deal with it, and look at the whole police force as being like, not all
that was unfortunate for you,
that was unfortunate for you,
but it's isolated.
right? But yet, when you go listen at the political nature of Black Lives Matter, you're unwilling to do the same about the movement, right? And take okay, like, yeah, I don't agree with that. You want me to not agree with these bad apples in the police force, but you're unwilling to do the same in the name of humanity for all people. Think about that.
That's a good point.
So there's something going on there. Like, if we just look at that,
There's a mental roadblock.
Yeah.
there's a
Something,
roadblock.
yeah.
Like, so we've got
Don't
this.
judge the whole thing
Yeah.
by these 3 bad apples yet, right?
Yeah.
You're judging the whole thing.
But you're judging the whole movement to the
Based
point
on-
where you're unwilling to say Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Matter. Not, can we say exist?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Like, and the fact that we have to start at this floor,
Yeah.
Right.
that's the problem. So like, I challenge everyone listening to this to just start there. Like, if that's you, that's why I loved your story about seeing a bunch of Black guys at the car. Like, you had a choice to make. Like, hey, I'm going to go with the status quo and be like, I don't know why I feel this way, but something's in me. I've never had a bad experience in my life. You could have said, hey, fight or flight, I got to take care of my family. My wife and kids are with me. I got a good excuse because of that. We're going to go run the other way. Well, so they leave, call the police, like you see a lot of white people do, you know, like, which is the world we live in and see, right? But you chose not to do that. You chose to engage and treat them as human beings, and you learned they're really great people. They're, you know, you learned about a sports league, right?
Yeah.
And so I've just told you earlier, I've had heart-to-heart conversations about my Black experience with white people and learned about the white experience, because I don't have the white experience, and that's given me more empathy for the white experience. And I was like, wow, I never considered that before. Like, and it's like, wow, okay, so now I can learn when I see that where that's probably coming from.
And that only happens when you don't let your primary source of information be Facebook and cable news and all the images fed to you that are designed to, let's just be straight, they're designed to sell ads.
Totally.
Like, at the end of the day, that's what they are.
and
They're
they
designed
wanna
to sell
hype it up.
ads, and then also, you know, there is a certain level of social engineering going on. I mean, we saw it in the last presidential election. And don't discount the fact that there are influences outside the U.S. who are trying to create division inside of our nation just by placing certain Facebook ads.
100%.
You know, and I'm not conspiracy theorist or anything like that. The reality is I deal in this world every day. It is true that this happens. You know what I mean?
Right. And so it's like the only way to have the kind of empathy and realization and education that you're talking about is by don't let that be what influences you. Like, do what we're doing right now. Sit around a table.
Yeah.
So then I think the
Like,
question
listen.
becomes, Angus, like, to your point, having that base conversation, and I think we're going to get there, but as a church right now, as church members, as those who want to, as we were praying before, to glorify God through this process, man, how do we get there, and how do we begin to kind of have those conversations and take steps?
I think we learn from the Pharisees we like to pick on in the Bible too much.
Okay.
Right? Like it's all so easy to look back 2020 and be like, man, y'all were crazy. You couldn't trust God, Israelites. Like, they did all that and gave you a cloud for shadows and comfort, and manna's falling from
Part in the Red
sky,
Sea
like
and-
part of the Red Sea, and you needed more, you know. But it's like, but if you read it without judgment eyes, like, you know, Moses went on the mountaintop How long was he up there? Like,
like a month or something.
it was like a
30
month.
days.
Like
30 or
have some
40.
empathy
Yeah.
here. Like,
Yeah.
and so it's kind of crazy. This is a true story. I was telling my wife this last night. Understand, years ago, Colin Kaepernick taking a knee was super controversial, right? Because we didn't want to have the conversation. We wanted to make it binary, and we wanted to make it up about things that it wasn't about. And that's not about disrespecting the perspective that you have. Your opinion matters, right? But we didn't want to talk about that. It was like, nope, my way or the highway on both sides.
Right.
Like my way or the highway was
Binary.
just binary.
No nuance.
No nuance. And so I heard a dialogue the other day, and listening to it, I told my wife this last night, man, now you see Roger Goodell put out this statement. You know, he's saying all the right things, right? Now you should definitely go.
Well,
okay.
because it's advantageous.
There you go.
I mean,
But you should do your homework and see why he's doing the right things. Go read that. It brought tears in my eyes. Like that video was pressed out there because the 70% black NFL players forced the issue to make him say that,
They raised
right?
their
Like,
voices,
and go watch the video. It'll bring tears to your eyes of the video they had to put together and post on Twitter to make Roger Goodell say that. But
to
now,
convince him to
convince him.
Gotcha.
We'll post the
check it
link.
out.
But the reason why I brought all that up is like if you listen to the time period of why there was so disdain for that, and just like because we don't want to have the conversation, we don't want to. There's a lot of systemic issues of why we don't want to say Black Lives Matter, and we want to pick a new topic to focus on to distract from the conversation we need to have, and that spins everybody up, and like a lot of our viewership, mostly white and black, like is being upset. Like, so white people are being upset about it. So there's an issue like here where I don't want to lose the white dollar, right? So let me
100%.
stop this protest, and you've got the president egging it on, and it just becomes this divisive fight.
Sure.
And so they acted on the mighty green dollar. We care about that color, right? So some decisions were made to protect the green dollar and ignore humanity and what's going on. But now that it's hot stuff, like we want to pivot to the current end thing that's going on now. And as I listened to that story and recapped it, I was like, man, hearing that like summary of events and how it sounded like talking about a white water fountain versus a colored water fountain. Like and in that moment, we saw what was going on, but I didn't even as a black person think of like the perspective I'd look at it from 10 years later as like, man, we literally lived like the white versus colored water fountain being broken down.
Kind of in hindsight.
Yeah, like in
as you were
hindsight.
able to see how it all unfolded.
Yeah.
What
The
were
dividing line is
forces
so
at
clear.
play.
You sound so ridiculous. Like you were so scared about making white people mad that you stopped it,
Sure.
pushed against it, tried to silence it, and now you got to come out with a video and say like, we were on the wrong side of history, like all this stuff like that's you're living the civil rights movement era type stuff like right now. But look how easy it is to be on the wrong side because we don't want. And that's what it's a long way of going
great
back
point,
to the
great point.
Pharisaic perspective, right? And that's why we've got
Humble yourself.
We've got to humble ourselves. We've got to be willing to be uncomfortable. And like I think as Americans, especially as white Americans, we don't typically want to be uncomfortable, right? Like, and I think I'll say America, we like comfort. Like I as a black
it's a drug,
American,
yeah.
I want comfort, right? Like I want my cushy house. I want to have all these nice things that we're so used to having. But we've got to get uncomfortable if we want to address this issue.
And all throughout the Bible, we see God pushing his people in a certain direction, in the direction of being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So that they progress, they grow, they see truth, they change.
The
rely
study
on
that
God.
you all just did on Haggai.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Oh,
Or
stop
or
building your
some people will
townhouses.
call
Yeah.
Haggai. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know who does that. Those weirdos.
Well, but yeah, like I think to what you were saying about just this idea of discomfort is one of the things I said yesterday in the sermon was if you're going to stick your neck out for the oppressed, like you will get criticized.
Oh yeah.
And there will be a price to
Totally.
pay for it. It's part of the fall. Like I think part of the fact that we live in a sinful, fallen world
Majority culture.
is
takes
there are going to
over.
be oppressed and oppressors.
Yep.
And to defend the oppressed means that you will, and so there's going to be, someone might be an executive or a decision maker at a company, and to stick your neck out for the oppressed might mean you lose your job, or or the bottom line is affected, or whatever. It might
Did you
mean
hear
that
what
you're
the,
labeled some things.
Serena Williams' husband did, co-founder of Reddit.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
So he, co-founder of Reddit, he actually stepped down from his role on the board and said, I highly encourage you all to look for a black candidate because there needs to be more diversity on this board.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so a lot of people sometimes mistake diversity meaning you just have to have, a couple black people on the board
Tokenism.
and tokenism. And
Yeah.
that's the whole point.
Right.
Whereas the true point of diversity is diversity of opinion, diversity of experience, diversity of thought. It just makes the whole idea even better.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, look at what we're doing right now.
Right.
Like, I mean, I guess I could be accused of saying, "Oh, we brought you guys on because you're black," and so we can say, "Hey, we have a diverse."
You did though. Al. No,
That's true.
that's-
I will say no, but I will say
No,
I asked you guys
Yeah.
because you are black men
Yeah.
with experience and
Different
a voice
perspectives.
that I do not have, that many in our church do not have, and we need to hear from your voice. And so, in
Well,
those
it's just like a husband
situations-
need to hear from his wife,
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
right?
of
I mean,
course.
if I ran my household by myself and made every single decision on my own, we'd be in a world of hurt.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I
And
need
it's-
the diversity of her thought, what she's
amen.
thinking.
Yeah.
And that's how God designed us, man.
And that's
to
how
be
God designed
diverse
us.
and different and beautiful.
And so take that like to the board of Grace Hill Church. We have said that we are intentionally going to pursue a racially diverse board. We just are going to
Elder
do that.
board.
That's not tokenism. That's
Was-
how can we shepherd our church that we hope and pray is a diverse congregation.
it's embracing
With-
God's idea for creation.
Without a diverse board, without a diverse perspective, and be able to speak from and experience and things like that. Man, that was really helpful. I think it's so important to get clarity on that because, I think Black Lives Matter, I think is a phrase that I know for me. Yesterday, I chanted it, with a group of other people, a diverse group of people.
Can I ask you an honest question
Yeah, absolutely.
on the spot? Was that hard when you first, whatever it was that you first chanted it as a white male?
Mm-hmm.
Can you share what went through your mind?
Yeah. For me, what went through my mind is if there's anything that made it hard for me, it was what if I'm misunderstood? What if other people were to say, oh, you are now associated with this, or this? Guilt by association is a really, the church really struggles with guilt by association.
That's good.
And I struggle with that. Absolutely. Like just oh man, like what do other people think? What about this? And so, but at the same time, it's just, man, what has brought me to a place of being able to enthusiastically do it is just seeing, like even watching you, Angus, talk about, like I can see, people may not be able to see this on camera, but like I can see your eyes getting teared up when you're saying, you're like, why is that phrase a controversial phrase? Like one of the things you keep saying is we're talking about the word matter. We're not even saying, you know what I mean?
Why do we have to go back to I am a man?
Yeah.
That's where we are. Like
Yeah.
if you read the history books, we're having the same conversation. I read an article from like these senseless killings keep happening back to back in these series of waves. This thing's happening in waves. I read an article from like 2014 or 15 when it was all happening again, and it's like you could have printed that and copy and pasted the names and ran it right now. It wouldn't have sounded different. Like, why is that? Like, that's why it's exhausting. That's why it hurts,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And but we rather distract the conversation with like, and this is how it's received as a black man, and woman, right? Like, it's like, nah, black lives matter. Hold on, all lives matter. And it's like, okay, well, yeah,
Yeah.
but like,
But that just
that-
squashed
like
out
right now,
exactly.
we understand that.
we understand that.
It's
All
taking the
lives-
spotlight off.
No one disagrees with that.
And it's like, okay,
Well, and when many evangelicals chant, which I would chant this with them, unborn lives matter. I totally agree with
100%.
that. No one comes back at that with all lives matter.
No, they don't. And this, so think about that. That like, why there's a pattern here that's probably not as visible if you're a white American because you don't get to see it, because you get to ignore it and it doesn't impact your life. We get to see it. We don't get to ignore it because it always impacts our lives. And so that's why there's discrepancy, and we have to, I'm having empathy as a person of color, a black person, to have that conversation because that's not the world I live in, that I get to ignore these things and go on about my life. Right.
Yeah.
But I believe it or not, have empathy for some whites that do. Right. And I say some because some whites are like in the system educating black kids. They see it. Some people are in interracial marriages. They see it. I've had conversations with them for the first time where the white mom goes pick up her twin, kids that don't really look like her, and every time she's called the nanny, and how she feels about that. Like so, like these like when you get in it, it's impossible to ignore.
It's unmistakable. Yeah.
But instead, like instead of talking about the problem, we rather create distractions. It makes us feel comfortable to not have to talk about the thing we don't want to talk about.
Well, it goes back to the comfort piece. Absolutely.
Yeah, it goes back to the comfort piece. So then we'll say
Hard
things that are also true in a twisted way. Like, okay, Blue Lives Matter. Well, where did that come from? When did there blue people? Are there aliens on the earth? Like, no. Being a cop or a police officer is not a nationality, ethnicity, or a race. It's a profession. It's a job.
It was interesting about that phrase too. I'll never forget being with a friend of mine who is African American, and we were in, I forgot what city we were in.
Doesn't matter.
Somewhere in the South. It wasn't here. It was anyway. We were together, and we were walking into a coffee shop in this town, and the coffee shop had a Blue Lives Matter sticker on the door. He stopped and said, "I'm not comfortable going in," and man, that was an education for me. You know what I mean? And that wasn't for him. That wasn't a belligerent thing. I'm not going in there. It was just like It was like almost like I'm just not comfortable.
I don't blame him. Yeah.
Because what the statement says, all right? It's not that police lives don't matter. Yes, police lives matter.
Of course they do. Yeah.
It's that the statement is designed to be a response to Black Lives Matter.
It's supposed to be this combative, like exclusive or.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a distraction.
Right,
that is a complete distraction.
Well, and getting back to your point, the hypocrisy would be your friend just needs to suck it up and just deal with it. Some things are uncomfortable, as opposed to the other side of that statement where, you know what I'm saying?
And here's what you have to understand about the movement you're seeing outside right now is for over 400 years, Black Americans have sucked it up and dealt with it.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Right, like we're the only race that came here against our will on a boat. To be enslaved, the only race. That's what makes this different, right? Yeah. Like that systemic oppression has happened forever. We didn't have humanitarian rights. We were never paid. A lot of the joys we see in DC as far as architecture and things like that, all those were built by slaves. Like we, as America, as a culture, everybody loves Black culture, but they don't love Black people.
Yeah, and I think too, like when we talk about it, because a lot of folks are saying, I don't want people to feel like Black people feel like they don't have opportunity, because that's not true, obviously, right? But we don't have the same level of opportunity because of institutionalized beliefs, right? That you have towards a culture that stem from those days and stem from that culture. Because, the reality is that if a white man had walked out of that, liquor store or wherever George Floyd was, in the same exact state and everything else had been going on, he would not have been restrained the same way. He just wouldn't have, and he would not have taken the risk that he took with George Floyd of potentially, harming this man, which eventually led to his death. That's the reality, because he would have been thinking, man, there's probably going to be a deep investigation. There was something that he thought, I'm able to take it a little bit further with this guy. Yeah. Right now, I'm speculating, but I believe that is just true, and you know what I mean.
Well, and I think there's a lot of what I think a lot of people need to realize. There's a lot of Black men and women who say that, because you just said I'm speculating. They speculate that based off of
their experience.
Yeah. They don't speculate that based off of just bitterness, or you know what I mean. It's like, yeah, I'm sure there's bitterness there, but it's actually speculation based off of
reality. Yeah.
No, I've either have myself or I have a loved one who has had a similar encounter, right? That's fueling the speculation.
Yeah, and
right?
So and kind of get back to your point about exhaustion, and I don't want to belabor this point, but like you talked about the police officers, and you can't judge the whole department by a few bad eggs. And when I have an encounter, I don't know if it's a bad egg or a good egg.
Right.
So when I get stopped, and to this day I'm 47 years old, if I get stopped, my heart is in my throat. It just is. And that is an honest to God statement. When I walk out of my house, I never leave my house without my driver's license. Never. I don't go on a bike ride without my driver's license. Because the very first thought I have is if I don't have my license and I get stopped for any reason,
There's a reason.
right?
Yeah.
Right?
There's a reason to
Yeah.
to
And
arrest
so,
you to whatever.
right. And so, I'm in an interracial marriage. Now, my wife, she doesn't feel that same level of like, oh, I got to have my license when I leave the house. Right?
Well, here's an example, right? Because and I've told this story before, but I have been pulled over and taken out of my car twice by police officers because my eyes look funny. Okay,
Yeah.
My wife can verify. She has been with me both times. I just have really squinty eyes. Both times the officer says your eyes look funny. Ask me out of the car, and here's why this is a good example. Is because, but my experience is not a black man's experience. Because the first time I thought it was hilarious and I was laughing. My heart wasn't in my throat.
There was still a measure of control that you had over the situation.
I had no fear at all. I thought it was hilarious. Oh, he thinks my eyes look funny. Second time, the cop was, the police officer was a little belligerent with me. Like he came up to the window. So the first time I got stopped because of a brake light, and the second time I rolled through a stop sign. And he was a little belligerent with me for rolling through the stop sign. He was really aggressive. Even my wife was like, "Man, why is he just acting this way?"
I've seen how you
And-
drive, so.
Yeah, he looked at me. He goes, your eyes look funny, and he's like, "Sir, I'm gonna need you to step out of the vehicle." And so he stepped out of the vehicle, and I was annoyed. I was annoyed at him, and so I'm gonna confess, I responded annoyed back at him. So he asked me to do a field sobriety test, and I refused. I said, "No, I'm not gonna do that." I was like, I am not intoxicated. I'm not going to do that. I was like, if you want to go get a breathalyzer, you can go get a breathalyzer, and I'll do that right now. I told the cop what to do,
Yeah.
and he did it. And I blew zeros, and he let me back in the car, and we left. And he gave me a ticket for the stop sign. Yeah. So I share that story as a comparative because it's like I felt the freedom the first time to laugh, and the second time to kind of make some demands with zero fear.
Yeah.
And I feel like for a black man, that's different. That could be life or death. I feel like.
Yeah, I mean now contrast that against being stopped by a black cop. So I still get scared, right? But not as scared, right? So I haven't really thought through that deeply, but I generally but I do have a fear, and I also have cousins. The man who I really account the first person to truly disciple me, Fairfax Police Department. You know what I mean? One of the greatest people I've ever met. Black guy. Sean Perkins.
So let's go there real quick because maybe this is something someone's uncomfortable with is kind of this stereotyping now of police officers, right? And that most are should be feared or anything like that. We all know police officers that
they're in our families,
respect and love, and they're So react to when many people say, "Oh, we should defund the police. We should, things like that." What's your response to that stuff?
I think that's an example of binary thinking. I don't think that makes sense to defund the police. I mean, that's true up until your house gets robbed. You know what I mean? The same thing with the people who were saying, well, I support the protests or I support the rioting.
Yeah.
Well, okay, then, I think I heard one comedian say, why don't you go down there and donate your car? You know what I mean? And so, I don't think defund the police is the right thing to say. And also, I don't believe in leading with negatives. Right. So it's not necessarily defund the police, but let's fund some things, right, that make sense towards the advancement of these goals and these ideas. Right. So and that's where my mind sort of goes, because when we were talking about the protest yesterday, right, I've been part of many protests throughout my life. I mean, I marched in Million Man March. I mean, the Million Man March, I could name a bunch that I went to my dad and everything else. My question always comes back to, okay, we marched, now what? What's next? What's the strategy?
Yeah.
And that's where I think people are probably just even watching this like, man, what?
Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there always has to be. Do I think that the protests are good? Absolutely. Yeah. right? The fact that this issue is becoming fully known and people are becoming fully aware, that it leads to empathetic conversation on both sides, on all sides, that we start to respect each other, love each other as creations of God, not just who you are, black, white, whatever, you know what I mean? But the reality is that there's a good number, not a good number, but basically the black culture as a whole, especially in America, there's a need for identity. There's a need for what's the word I'm looking for? Just belief in who they are, valuing who they are. Right, because they've been told for so long through images and experience that they aren't on the same level, that there truly isn't this equality that exists for them.
Right.
I
just want to jump on that. Like, I would just encourage my white brothers and sisters on that topic is believe your black and brown brothers and sisters when they say what you just said, right? This is what I've been told. This is the way it's been. Because I think so many times the response can be, hey, prove it. Show me empirical data.
Well, how about me as a kid who loved cartoons, watching Bugs Bunny, watching Tom and Jerry, and some of the images that you've seen there.
Absolutely.
And, at my age, that's what I saw every Saturday morning.
Right.
And
so you're talking.
It is subconsciously.
It's subconsciously
the
ingrained.
images of basically black people with big lips and like their features.
I mean, every time Elmer
all that
Fudd
stuff.
would shoot somebody,
Right.
right? The image of like he would shoot somebody in the face with a rifle, and what they would become after he shot them in the face with a rifle. What the image looked like there.
Yeah, it was a black
right? And I can remember as a kid watching these things, and I didn't think anything of it.
Right.
But you're taking it in, man.
But I'm taking it in. So
Yes, and exactly. So it's and I think
So
what I just
deep.
want to encourage my white brothers and sisters is just take what your black and brown brothers and sisters are saying as truth. You don't need to verify it. Validate it and listen and learn. You know what I mean? Because I think that's a lot of the issue is so many people they just feel like I feel like what you're saying is an overreaction or it's an isolated type of thing. And I think what we're seeing is finally some waking up to, no, this is a pretty universal experience amongst the black community.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Americans are taught, black and white Americans are taught the history that traditionally white America wants us to hear. Like, I've met white people that grew up in Minnesota that don't even know who Emmett Till is. If you don't know who Emmett Till is, look it up.
Right.
Right.
Go to the museum.
Go to the
downtown.
museum and go downtown. Like, learn black history, because the black history you're going to learn is American history.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But it's not being taught in your schools. And until we're ready to throw away this assumed understanding that we think we already have of America, we're not going to go anywhere in this conversation.
Right.
Right. And that's where the education has to happen. And it's up to you to go do that education. But what you'll learn, and if you want to understand why the pain in our community, is because George Floyd is Emmett Till to us.
Yes.
Sorry. Read the story of how the white lady that lied, she admitted she lied 50 years later. She made up the whole story that guy Emmett Till killed the way he did. This is a repeat problem in this country.
Yeah.
And until we're ready to read and learn about it and appreciate the systemic issue it impacts this community, we're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
And so when you hear this, like, why are black people so afraid of the police? Because in our community, in our world, the police started as law enforcement to wrangle up slaves. The KKK was in the police. Like, that. This is the systemic oppression that grew up in that community that still exists today.
Yeah.
If you remember just a few months ago, the images of a bunch of white people with assault rifles standing on the Michigan steps, upset because they can't go out because of coronavirus, shoving with the police. And you see the image now of just peaceful protest Like a lot of the community organizers have gotten together to rally down and control the rioting and all that stuff, right? But I dare you to go dig into social media and watch the live videos of who's coming in and doing the rioting. Don't just look at the news. Look at who's starting the violence in these riots. Don't assume what you see.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like go to live feeds, go study and do your homework. And what you'll learn is what you're being fed, because this is why we can't be lazy anymore. We've got to dive in and learn the reality of what's going on in these worlds.
It's not true.
It's not true. And when you learn that, you get to a better understanding of the problem and the systemic issue, and then you'll step back. And this is why you see so many, I believe, why we see so many different people that don't look like me in the streets is because we're in an age of social media and live streaming, so we can do that, and people are outraged. They're like, "Whoa, like this is not okay. I didn't see this, whether because I didn't want to or because I didn't look for it, but now I'm seeing it and I can't ignore it, and we must do something to stop this." And it's like. The imagery is amazing. Like, why so much resistance of gets like the base of this whole conversation is that like black people matter.
Right. Right.
That's what's that's the difference.
And man, you're just point on just to go learn history. It's a book I've been recommending over and over again just because of the experience I had in reading it. But
I think in that first sermon you.
Yeah,
referenced.
the Warmth of Other Suns by Isabella Wilkerson. Have you guys, either of you, read that yet?
I have not read that.
Man, it's a journalist who traces the three I believe it's 3 different stories, kind of lives of 3 different people through the Great Migration, and the Jim Crow South and all of that. And I didn't learn that in school.
No, you're not going to.
I went to Fairfax County Public Schools. Now, I don't know what they teach today. You know what I mean? That was a long time ago.
It's not taught.
But I'm just saying, like, I didn't learn that in school.
No, you're not going
And
to.
so that was such an education for me. Like, it just opened my world. It just opened so much for me on understanding, like, the roots and the seeds that were just planted, of which all of this has what has grown into what we're experiencing today. So, yeah, like, go visit the Museum of African American History and Culture downtown. Go to the bottom floor and work your way to all the way up.
Yeah.
And take your time. You need like 2 days, to be honest.
And if you've been before, go again.
Because
you'll see it
I went for several hours and I haven't made it all the way to the top yet. And so it's like, because there's so much information. There's so much information in that museum. So don't go as like leisure. Go to learn and to read and to spend a day doing that, because they do a fantastic job telling the story, giving you images, bringing you into the experience, so that you can understand kind of what the history behind all of this. Absolutely. I'll tell you the image at the African American Museum that just is blazoned into my mind, and like it's the image of Thomas Jefferson with the Declaration of Independence in his hand. This is a big statue of Thomas Jefferson, and behind them, and he's standing upon a pile of bricks, and behind him is a pile of bricks, and each of those bricks have a name of a slave on it. And you're just like, man, it's just a powerful image, but they tell the story of that, right? Like, they tell the story of how our nation was built on the backs of slaves.
Absolutely.
And so that's not a political point to be made to make people upset. There's truth there, and we need to
Just a reality.
we need to have the maturity to face it, and to ask, okay, all right, what does that mean going forward?
Yeah, and it's not brought about to generate white guilt. It's not. It's just not a thing. Like, I mean, like, obviously we know those are things, but like, that's not the intent to bring this up, to rub it in your face. Look at what you did to us. Like, we hate you forever. Like, that's not what this is about.
Right.
This is about acknowledging the systemic oppression that era created, that still exists today, but you don't have to experience it. So instead of assuming that, oh, you're just being racist or trying to drum up a racist target because you just are lazy, right, or whatever other thing you were taught, like, or you were taught subconsciously without being told those words, now is the time to do the homework and research. If you haven't before, fine, forgive yourself. But go do your homework and research to learn what you were not taught. I promise you will learn so much that you were not taught.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Have the humility to do that.
Yeah.
Let me check our time. It's 1:12. All right, we should begin to wrap this up. So before we do that, any kind of last comments by anybody?
Just like practical, like encouragements. And,
Yeah.
just overall, I think I kind of I wrote a post about experiences that I've had throughout life. Sort of how do I address this as a father to my daughter? And I got a lot of responses from people like, man, Justin, sorry to hear about that. And I'm like, well, if you said sorry, then you actually didn't read it, because I wasn't looking for sorry. You know what I mean? I was looking for, man, I was encouraged by what you said about what the answer to all this is, right? And the answer for me is Christ. Amen. Because if we talk about like, well, where do we go next? What's next, right? So with civil rights, we had to definitely we needed legislation. By law, I wasn't allowed to drink from a certain water fountain. By law, I wasn't allowed to enter on a certain bus. Right. You made the point that there's some laws that probably need to change here, but they're not as dramatic or severe as the laws that we saw back in civil rights, right? But there are laws.
Overt.
Right, as overt. Yeah, that's a better word.
Yeah.
So there are words that need to definitely change. But at the same time, we need more hearts to change. We need empathy. Amen. So if, in the same way as blacks, we need empathy with our white brothers and sisters as well, with our Asian brothers and sisters, our Latino brothers and sisters, and, across, multiple conversations we need to have in terms of understanding each one's experience. And the only way that I know to change a heart, right, is through Christ Jesus, through the blood of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, man.
That's the only way. So if there's an encouragement, it's, man, we just need to pray. We need the love of Christ. I'm fully convinced in order to get through this issue, in order to get the type of healing that we desire, because we can march and protest, and I think that's the right thing to do when it's done peacefully.
Right.
But without that underlying love of Christ for each other, it's not going to go anywhere. We're going to end right back where we were before.
Right. Yeah. Well, and because what does Christ do, right? Christ washes us, right? He makes us clean. He forgives us our sins. So if we're complicit in some of this stuff, you know what I mean? There's forgiveness for that, right? And so let's be forgiven and let's move forward and repent and seek to grow. What does Christ also do? He reconciles us together, right? We're reconciled to him and we're reconciled to one another. And so as the church, we can live that out.
So the perfect example, the perfect example you gave me was your dad. And I knew this story just because, I called your dad one day when your mom was in the hospital, and he and I sat on the phone for about half an hour. And he told, and I think it was that conversation when he told me this story. But you also told me about when he worked in was it a packaging factory or
a door factory?
Right, you're right.
Yeah.
In Louisiana. And
Shreveport, Louisiana.
In Shreveport, yeah. And, he was subject to institutional thoughts about blacks his whole life, until he went to this factory and he saw a lot of black men working on the floor and decided, you know what, I'm going to go work with them and hear and learn their stories.
Yeah.
And Monty will say, that's when everything changed for me.
Yes.
Right? But what led him there? Right? How is it that he just on his own decided to go, I need to go hear these stories and understand these people, right? And now I have...
Doesn't just happen by accident.
Doesn't happen by accident, man. That's only the Holy Spirit, because, to the point where now I look at your dad as a spiritual elder for me, as someone who I learn from, who I want to model, right? Because of his Christ-driven life. I love your father, inside and out, every bit and part of him, right? And so... it's only the Holy Spirit that does that, and that drove him to do that, to where now he's an elder and a discipler for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, man.
So.
Yeah. Which the point there being, if you're struggling with anything in this, if you're still struggling with like the phrase Black Lives Matter or or anything, you're kind of go sit down, go relationship. Like
that's it.
Friendship.
It's relationship.
It's relationship. And
food.
If I can, Coach. If I can add to that, like I hear this thing a lot, like I don't know what to say, or I'm uncomfortable. Like maybe if I say something wrong, I'll offend them. Like your black friends are hurting.
Amen.
They're struggling. For all their life, they're ignored. And you're like, oh, no, they're not. Like, we see them all the time. We go to work. Like, no. They're ignored. Like, they feel like I'm on the chats with them. I'm talking to them. Like, but what they need is more than just, like, thinking of you or, like, how you're doing. or even just like how I can help, but maybe like just listen. And it's not up for every black person to teach you black history, right? The best conversations I'm having are people doing their own homework and coming back and asking a question about what they saw and what they learned, and like asking how that's impacted me. And then I'll share my story and they're like blown away by it. And then they go learn some more, or maybe I'll give them some more resources, and then they come back and like, but I love those dialogues. They're fine. Like, you know, but like, don't just take up space, like be the change. Right. And that happens, you know, like pray, like God, show me. This is where it starts, right? Show me. Like, what am I doing
Just come with open
that I don't
hands
even notice that I'm doing that's allowing me to support this way of life? Because let me tell you something, this is the way of life in America.
Yeah.
For black people and people of color. Like this is real, and you're seeing it. You're witnessing the resistance against it. And it's going to be a violent resistance to change this, but it's going to be worth it.
Yeah.
But it's going to take work from white people, because this is a white people problem to solve.
And man, just, you know, you're saying, man, just your black brothers and sisters, they're struggling. You know, watching the George Floyd video is traumatic, especially if you're a black man or woman. It's traumatic. It's traumatizing. It wounds, right? And so I think that's the other thing, just to like, for us to keep in mind as well, is that, you know, so many times you know, when you're traumatized, when you're wounded, when you're hurt, when you're grieving, you normally aren't fully processed through all of your emotions, and you can't fully articulate them perfectly and be able to argue back at any argument. You know what I mean? Because you're
totally.
grieving. You're
Yeah.
you're emoting.
Yeah.
And man, that's where so many of our black brothers and sisters are, and that's okay. They got they have space for that, and I think when the response is, hold on, explain this, explain that, defend this point, defend that point, you're just like, man.
Yeah, I just want to add to the one thing though, is that I believe that it's not just a white problem to solve though. I want to say though that, you know, as blacks, we too also have a responsibility for each other, right? Because if you know, when I look at specific scenarios, now there's certain things like, you know, like we have this term DWB, right? Driving while black. Ain't nothing I can do about that, right? So that's a problem that has to be solved in the hearts of those who are oppressing, right? Blacks can't solve that.
Yeah.
But if my son is in a predicament that he could have kept himself out of due to his own, you know, issues and not, you know, basically not abiding by law or whatever the case may be, that was my responsibility as a father.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's also, I have a responsibility to give back to young brothers and sisters because I've been fairly fortunate in my life, right? One of the reasons that my business is designed the way that it is really is to help black people, right? The majority of the users who use my system are black. Right, and it's to teach them about real estate, to give them put hands in technology in their hands, enterprise class technology that they just haven't really had access to before. That's why we put so much money and effort into it. That doesn't mean that it's designed only for black people. It's not, but it's one way that I'm like, I need to give back, right, to my community. And help and move them forward. So, you know, I think with any problem, it's something that we all, and I think that's what we're saying, like, let's all jump in this together and solve this thing together.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I need to point out an important layer of why I said that statement. It kind of goes back to the Me Too movement. The problem is the person that is the victim in that situation is powerless. Like, there's this dominating power that gets to overtake them to where if they say no to their manager or you know, boss, then they could lose their job, or like, and that's the thing we kind of overlook and glimpse over. And so the layered cake of why I made the statement is the white people problem to solve. Not that because it's only a white person's problem to solve. It is definitely a joint thing for all that you just said. The point that I'm calling out is that people that look like me are usually not in the power position to make the change in the system. We're not usually in the power position to actually say, no. Like, let's change how we allow those bad apples, you know, to always get away and destroy our communities. Let's change, like, how we do make it hard for black people to get better positions in their jobs or move up. Let's change the rules and policies that don't make it harder for people to get on these black boards and positions like that. That's where it's like yes, it's always a joint thing, but my point is we're not typically empowered we're powerful. We're not typically empowered in those leadership roles to make the systemic changes that need to happen.
Yeah, now I mean,
That's my point.
that makes a lot of sense as far as like the victim versus the victimizer. Totally agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I don't know what time it is. I'll make one more last little quick story from even in my experiences. To that point, I went to seminary at Reformed Theological Seminary here in D.C. To my knowledge, it's a great seminary. It's great. I really love the people there. I really think that to my knowledge, I didn't have any black authors that I had to read except for Augustine.
Sure.
Which most people don't even know
North
that he's
Africa.
black.
Yeah, that's right.
That's true.
But he is. He's an African. Okay.
But then there are people who try to discount that.
Sure.
Oh, he was
sure.
a Roman citizen.
Yeah. So anyway, and I'll say, so kind of growing up in a Reformed tradition, white evangelical Reformed tradition, that I had a perspective of the black church of, my theology was better than theirs.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And man, until after I graduated, Reformed Theological Seminary started to diversify their faculty and their board all the way up. And I think it was a good example of I think some of the white people at the top said, the governing structures of this seminary need to be diversified. And so they started to do that. And I think that was, I think, an example of a white person who had some power saying, hey, we need to start making some changes. That led to black professors being hired.
Mm-hmm.
And so RTS brought in Dr. Carl Ellis Jr. You could read some of his books. He has a book called Free at Last, which is like 30 years old. And he's calling all this stuff out, right, from a church perspective. I mean, so he's a prophet in that kind of way. They brought him in to do a course on cultural apologetics where he went through black church theology. He went through black church apologetics. And, man, it just exploded everything for me. I mean, by far, I audited the class. I audited it because I already graduated. So in alumni, I can audit for free. So I audited it. And man, for me, it was by far the most significant seminary class I took.
Wow.
Because he brought me into a perspective faithful to the scriptures, good theology that challenged a lot of my theology, right? And so anyway, I just say that as to say, man, it's just such a good example of when we begin to do those things and bring in these other voices, man, we all get better.
Oh yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm.
We all get better.
There's studies that prove it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I just share that because, man, that was huge for me, just even in my own journey in this stuff. Being able to learn from him and sit under his teaching and his leadership and read his books and all that stuff.
Cool.
So.
Yeah. No, I love it. I mean, as a church, it's funny because we deal with this issue even beyond just, black and white, but just dispensationalism and things that are meant to sort of divide and what our true inheritance is.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? As children of
We'll always
of
find
Christ.
something, man.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
The fallen world.
Yeah.
Well, guys, you got a conference call in like 2 minutes. So,
4 minutes.
guys, I just want to thank you for coming on and having a conversation. I know it was helpful.
Hopefully.
Man, I'm just so personally thankful for both of you. Man, you guys are such good friends. Like, honestly, like both of you guys are just like gifts dropped out of heaven. And just to my wife and I, we just love you guys, your wives, your kids. So, man,
We're
thank
thankful.
you.
Thankful
thank
for our church.
Yep.
Thankful for your leadership as pastors.
Yeah.
To even have this conversation.
Yeah, it takes courage.
You know what I mean? And honestly have it. So thank you. We love you.
Yep.
Love you guys.
Yeah. Love you guys too.
I'm going to step out so I can.
Oh, you can. Yeah, you're still running the whole thing.
Go for it.
Yeah. Grace Hill, thanks for tuning in. I think I speak for everyone here to say if you have more questions, if you want to dig in more, man, I hope this was just kind of like an appetizer.
Do it again.
And yeah, we could do it again, do it in person. This is something I hope that our church can just grow in. We can have honest community and honest discussion. Like we were saying earlier, what Christ does is he reconciles us all together so we can have good, hard conversation. And man, that's my prayer, is that at Grace Hill that can exist and all that. So, hey, we love you. Thanks so much for tuning in, and be sure to join us Wednesday night, Philippians Bible study. We'll be here back on the cameras.
Part 75.
Yeah, seriously. All right, love you guys. Have a great week.